In this session, we will be talking about the types of stanzas, the different phases of poetry. A poem is an imaginative text that often attempts to communicate complex emotional and intellectual experiences in as few words as possible. Beforehand, let's differentiate prose versus poetry. Prose, like essays and stories, are composed of sentences and paragraphs, while poetry is divided into lines and stanzas. Before going farther, let's give a clear definition of stanza and line. Stanza is a group of lines forming the basic recurring metrical unit in a poem, while line is a unit in which poem is divided. This is an example of poetry. This is a poem by Dr. Elena Hopkins. How many stanzas are there in the poem? How many lines are there in each stanza? What type of stanza is being used by the poet? Poems are divided into lines and stanza. There are 4 stanzas in the poem, and each stanza has 3 lines. The title is Cradle. The first stanza is, I was cradled with big waves. I was drowned 1,000 times. I learned to swim after my survival. The second stanza is, I was cradled with strong winds. I fell several times. I learned to be unconventional. The third stanza is, I was cradled with immaturity. I was stirred without pity. I become humble and resilient. The fourth stanza is, I was cradled by the great light. I rested from a heavy fight. I become joyous and content. Find out what type of stanza is being used by the poet by listening to my discussion. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and click the notification button so you will be updated of my upcoming lessons. Let's have the types of stanzas. This is teacher L for the types of stanzas. There are 8 types of stanzas. Let's start with couplet. Couplet has 2 lines, which usually rhyme. The use of heroic couplet was pioneered by Geoffrey Chaucer in the Legend of Good Women and the Canterbury Tales, and this has been perfected by John Dryden and Alexander Pope. An example of a couplet is a poem by Robert Lee Frost entitled as A Minor Bird. There are 2 stanzas in this poem, and as you see, there are 2 lines in each stanza. I have wished a bird would fly away, and not sing by my house all day. Have clapped my hands at him from the door, when it seemed as if I could bear no more. The second type of stanza is tercet. Tercet has 3 lines which may or may not have the same end rhyme. Tercets appeared in biblical Hebrew poetry and was introduced to English poetry by Sir Thomas White. This is an example of poem with 3 lines, which is called as tercets. This is written by Sir Thomas White. The title is Second Satire. My mother's maids, when they did sew and spin, they sung sometimes a song of the field mouse, that for because their livelihood was but so thin, would needs go seek her townish sister's house. She thought herself endured too much pain, the storm blast her cave so sore did souse. The third type of stanza is quatrain. Quatrain has 4 lines, which could be written in any rhyme scheme. Quatrain is popularized by Edward Fitzgerald. a Rubaiyat form in his translation of Persian poet Omar Khayyam. A Rubaiyat stanza is an iambic pentameter quatrain with rhyme scheme of AABA. If you want to understand better about the rhyme scheme, you could watch my lesson about the Philippines short forms of poetry. An example of a poem with quatrain stanza is a poem by Robert Burns, A Red, Red Rose. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. Let's have the fourth type of stanza. This is quintin. Quintin is also known as quintet or cinquain. Quintet or cinquain have 5 lines which may be rhymed or unrhymed and is a typical stress pattern. This was invented by an American poet, Adelaide Cravesey. She was inspired by Japanese haiku and tanka. An example of quintain poem is a poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley, Ode to a Skylark. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, over which clouds are brightening, thou dost float enthroned, like an embodied joy whose race is just begun. The fifth type of stanza is Setset. Setset consists of 6 lines, which was first introduced by Petrarch, who is an Italian poet, in his sonnets. An example of Setset is the most famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe, Annabelle. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name Annabelle. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and loved by me. The sixth type is septet. Septet is a 7-line stanza having any form or meter. This is also known as rhyme royale. This septet is musically originated by Ludwig van Beethoven because of his composition for 7 instruments or voices. An example of septet in poetry is a poem by Michael Degenhardt, True Miracle. Precious child, you have changed the world. You've given us forgiveness and give chances for true salvation. Child of the world, crying not, may we learn from you and your love. Next is Octave. Octave consists of 8 lines, which was perfected by the Italian poet Petrarch. An example of Octave is by John Milton, his Sonnet 19. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodge with me useless, though my soul more bent, to serve therewith my Maker and present, my true account, lest her returning tide doth God exact a labor light denied, I fondly ask but patience to prevent. And the 8th type of stanza is Spenserian. Spenserian is a 9-line stanza devised by Edmund Spenser, who is an English poet. Spenserian has 8 iambic pentameter lines and 1 Alexandrine line with a rhyme scheme of ABABBCBC. If you have noticed on the spelling of the words, they look strange, aren't they? This is because this poem was written in 1500s to honor Queen Elizabeth I. The fairy queen is considered archaic or old-fashioned. The fairy queen is an example of Spenserian type of stanza. This is the first stanza. Lo, I the man, whose muse whilom did mask, as time her thought in lowly shepherds' weeds, am now enforced a far unfitter task, for trumpets turn to change mine oaten reeds, and sing of knights and ladies' gentle deeds, whose praises having slept in silence long, me all to mean the sacred muse reads, to blazon broad amongst her learned throng, fair wars and faithful loves shall moralize my song. Can you still remember the 8 types of stanzas? Let's review to make sure. Couplet has 2 lines. Tercet has 3 lines. Quatrain has 4 lines. Quintain or quintet or cinquain has 5 lines. Setset consists of 6 lines. Septet has 7 lines. Octave has 8 lines. And Spenserian has 9 lines. The 8 types of stanzas are couplet, tercet, quatrain, quintain, setset, septet, octave, and Spenserian. Now let's check your understanding of the lesson. In this poem cradled, what type of stanza is being used by the author? Okay, this is using tercet because each stanza has 3 lines. Again, this poem cradled is using tercet. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to click like, comment, and subscribe. This has been Teacher L.